Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ethics Across the Curriculum in the Yard workshop 2021. I'm Jeff McCrease. I'm the Deputy Director of the Stockdale Center for Ethical Leadership. This workshop is made possible through a generous grant from the Robert and Mary Looker Foundation and the Naval Ingersoll family. This is day one, Monday. A overview of this workshop is as follows. Monday, we'll start with introductions and sharing of goals. We'll look at the leadership and course sequence overview, and then have a session on accreditation of the ethics requirements of ABET, ACS, and the Middle States Commission on Higher Education. Tuesday will be a broad overview of moral reasoning based upon how it's taught here at the Naval Academy. Wednesday is a workshop on constructing effective learning outcomes and a discussion on podcasting and new technology. And finally, a work on everyone's workshop, their project for the workshop. Thursday is an asynchronous project workday. And then Friday, we'll do our presentations. Invited guests will be invited here at 10 a.m. The learning outcomes for this workshop are as follows. At the conclusion of this workshop, participants shall be able to, number one, comprehend the basic principles and sequence of key leadership themes from Naval Academy leadership courses. Number two, comprehend the basic principles of moral reasoning as taught in the Naval Academy's NE 203 ethics course. Number three, construct effective learning outcomes related to ethical content in a course, discipline, sport, or other activity. Number four, develop curriculum content that integrates ethics into a course, discipline, sport, or other activity. And number five, collaborate with key influencers across different disciplines to confront the shared challenges of incorporating ethical issues into a course, academic curriculum, discipline, sport, or other activity. The chief deliverable is a project quad chart that looks something like this, with a project title and an overview and significance up in the top left. In the top right, the faculty name and department, or where one is from across the Naval Academy campus. In the top left quadrant, the learning outcomes. The top right quadrant, the timeline and assessment plan. The bottom left quadrant, the lesson and strategic plan. And then finally, in the bottom right, the next steps. So before we turn this over to Professor Doug Rao, we'd like to go around the room for a few minutes and introduce our workshop participants. If you would introduce yourself, where you are from, and what part of the yard you're from, and what your workshop project is. Maybe starting with Professor Jamie Schlesman, please.
Jamie Schlesman. I'm just finishing my 20th year in the chemistry department at the Naval Academy, and I'm the chair of the ethics working group in that department, and my goal is to evaluate and improve a research ethics seminar that we've developed over the last 2 years for our first and 10 majors, with case studies regarding research ethics practices.
Great, thanks very much. Amanda Click.
Sure. I'm Amanda Click. I'm the head of research and instruction in Nimitz Library. My goal here is to develop, format TBD, a module, tutorial, lesson plan that can be kind of dropped into different courses and different disciplines that will help midshipmen meet one of our information learning outcomes that is related to the ethical use of information.
Thanks. Captain Select Aaron Meehan.
Thanks, sir. I'm Erin Meehan, Associate Chair of the English Department. I'm primarily interested in the relationship that humans have within cyberspace, but found in literature. So I'll try to tease that out this week.
Coach Chris Campbell.
Yes, my name is Chris Campbell. I'm a track and field coach within AAA, the Associate Head Track and Field Coach. And my primary interest is basically developing some case studies and scenarios that we can discuss among our athletes to just basically apply moral reasoning.
Okay. Professor Shirley Lynn.
Shirley Lynn from the chemistry department. I'll be working with Jamie Schlesman, and we will be together working on a map of how to incorporate the Chemist Code of Ethics from the American Chemical Society throughout the 6 semesters of the chemistry major.
Coach Jim McNeil.
Yeah, Coach Jim McNeil. I'm a spread football coach, also an adjunct with the NE 203 course. And there's been some studies that have shown that the longer an athlete is in organized athletics, the lower their ethical standards and their moral reasoning is. So I'd like to take a look at that and see if that is in fact the case here at the Naval Academy. If it is, institute potentially some ways to combat that.
Okay, Mr. Joe Fondale.
Joe Fondale, a professor of physical discipline in the physical education department. And my interest is in the ethical dilemmas for an instructor around the physical education classes and the physical readiness testing.
Okay, Commander Tom Flaherty.
Good morning, Commander Tom Flaherty. I'm the 5th Battalion officer at the Academy. My primary interest is developing and growing a culture of integrity and accountability inside the Brigade of Midshipmen, specifically following the shotgunning of the class of 2024 and 2023.
Okay, Professor Hatem Al-Bedouini.
Yeah, Associate Professor Hatem Bedouini in the Electrical and Computer Engineering Department. And my project goal is to improve the process by which we conduct engineering ethics assignments as part of assessment and accreditation processes.
Okay, Professor Sylvia Peart.
I'm Sylvia Peart, professor at the Languages and Cultures Department. And the main objective here is to focus on FS 412 course, Latin American Culture, and create some assignments where I infuse some of those chapters that I teach with leadership themes and ethical dilemmas for my students to ponder and write about.
So the majority of today's workshop is going to be devoted toward a development of our leadership sequence, our 4-year leadership sequence here at the Naval Academy. And to introduce each one of our course directors, we'd like to turn it over to Professor Doug Rao.
All right, well, thank you very much. I certainly appreciate the opportunity to be here and also just to talk about what we do in the division of LEAD and also within the Department of Leadership, Ethics, and Law. So within LEAD division, there's only one department, and it's LEL, Leadership, Ethics, and Law. My position is I'm the Professor of Leadership Education, and a big part of my role is to look across our curriculum and to see how we are connected and how we are integrated. What I would like to talk with you about is some of the foundational documents that we have here and principles we have here at the Naval Academy and how we use them within LEL, how we use them in LEAD. And I hope that as we go through this, you will see that there's very easy connection points, touch points for the different areas that you are working, whether it's in the Bancroft Hall, whether it's in the sports field, or whether it's over in academics. But if I could just kind of walk us back just to some fundamental documents. What is our mission? Graduate leaders, okay? That's our mission. Graduate leaders who are going to go and be prepared to go into harm's way. That's the focus that we have in LEAD. And so the more that we can do to help you, whether it's in Bancroft Hall or on the sports field or over an academic, that's what we want to continue to work on, to give you some of the tools that we have that's part of our studies, part of our researchers that would make that available to you. Okay, this is something that we like to talk about. Outside Lewis Hall is a big statue of Admiral Stockdale, and this is a presentation that he gave up at West Point. But this really applies to all of us. He's talking to the cadets saying, hey, when you leave here, you get more than a diploma. You leave this place with a highly developed conscience, okay? You undergone this education that people refer to when they say education is what's left over after you've forgotten all the facts. But his big point here is the capability that you have coming out of the Service Academy, out of the Naval Academy is leadership. That's what we are focused on. That's what we hope that we graduate leaders. I hope that you would look for the touch points that you see here we actually have a mission statement within LEAD, okay? And so take a look at these things. How does this integrate with the humanities, with the engineering and sciences? How does this integrate with what you do in the sports field and what do you do in Bancroft Hall? Some of the issues of human behavior, the humanities, and what we teach in some of our courses here. Midshipman, junior officer leadership role, responsibilities, and values. Bancroft Hall's all over that, right? Demonstrate analytical, critical thinking anywhere in the academic community. We want to be exercising that within our midshipmen, learning that analytical, critical thinking. Personal character, ethics, responsibility, officership. Again, we teach those things. We We go through case studies. We work through those particular aspects in our courses that we teach in Luce Hall. Exercise individual, interpersonal, organizational leader skills and abilities. Sports field, Bancroft Hall, it's all over, right? But this is what we see that we are part of, teaching the midshipmen, and hopefully they take some of these skills outside Luce Hall. One of the things, Luce Hall, every midshipman comes through Luce Hall for a course every year. Every midshipman does. And that's what you'll see. We have the plebe leadership course, we have the youngster ethics course, we have the second class leadership course, and we have the first class law course. So they all come through Luce Hall every year. We'd like it to be more than one semester every year, but that's what we have to work with. It's actually 10 credits that they get while they're in this particular part of the curriculum. The other thing that we have really focused on, Captain Bernanke, as the division director who is just recently retired, was actively engaged in Strategic Plan 2030. And I'll just tell you, as a personal point for me, I used to regularly pick up Strategic Plan 2020, and I would ask folks, how are we doing? Nobody knew, okay? We are 1 year into Strategic Plan 2030. And so we, within this division, want to focus on the things that are listed as goals, and how are we going to exercise those goals? How are we going to reach those goals? How are we going to measure how we're doing towards achieving those particular goals? But the vision, I mean, this is the premier leadership education institution for developing naval officers who will preserve peace and prevail in conflict, right? We're going to graduate leaders who can go in harm's way. That's the vision in Strategic Plan 2030. And then there's a couple parts of this plan that I want to bring out and focus on. These are the aspects of the plan. And if you haven't seen it, you can go online and pull it down. It's all electronic now, but it's got all of these aspects that I'm going to touch on here. And so for us, when you look at the academics, the admissions, athletics, professional development, and the heritage and tradition, but there's this ethical leadership, which is a primary part of what we do. Prepare midshipmen for the challenges of combat leadership, okay? Graduate leaders, ready to go in harm's way. Instill the core values of honor, courage, commitment, and promote a dedication to the highest standards of moral behavior. And this is to develop our midshipmen in these ways, okay? Teach them, have them exercise it, have them develop so they take this on board. And so they are empowered in order to go and serve our nation and make courageous, ethical decisions. This comes out of our strategic plan. A lot of people spend a lot of time on this. And how are we exercising this? How are we working towards meeting this particular goal? Goal 1, develop midshipmen. And so look at this objective number 2. Boom, falls right into what Jeff McCrease is talking about. Integrate ethical leadership and character development efforts across the entirety of midshipman experience, including living at Bancroft Hall, as well as academic, professional, athletic, and extracurricular programs. That's what this is all about, and we greatly appreciate you all being part of that to help expand this and to meet this particular objective. And so part of what Jeff and I talk about is how are we doing on meeting this objective? Okay? And this is just one small aspect, one small step of trying to get people across the yard, across the curriculum, to understand how we can do this, how we can measure this. And Objective 7 you see in here is provide an environment that incorporates relevant, complex, real-world issues. We talk a lot about case studies, and I've heard the comments about case studies, which are important, right? Because we want the midshipmen to experience some of these things and to make their decisions and then reflect on decisions that were actually made elsewhere. We have spent a lot of time and maybe something for you to think about, to take case studies that when you review this case study as a plebe, you may take it from perspectives of being a junior enlisted. When you take the same case study in any 203, you may consider what it is as far as being a junior officer. When you see the same case study in NL 310, maybe it's more of a squadron level, maybe it's a little more senior position. What perspective, what changes in your decision based on the perspective of the seat that you've got? Okay, so we are working hard on that, to take similar case studies and run them through the entire curriculum. And then at the end, of course, we have our JAGs come in and say, okay, that may be the decision you make. Let us also talk about what the legal aspect is of what you do. Okay. So anyway, we try and do these things. We greatly appreciate Michael Sears in using some of the technologies in order to expand our library of case studies and just changing the opportunities in order to work through these and make decisions. If you haven't seen this, and maybe it's a little bit hard to read, but this is really important, and this has been a focus for me. We say that our graduates will have these 9 attributes. We will have developed these 9 attributes within our graduates. And so I always, as someone who's teaching courses in leadership, ethics, and law, I always present this slide in my class and say, okay, what are we focusing on here? And so we talk a lot now in LEL about resilience. We talk a lot about inclusivity. We talk a lot about the courage of character. We talk a lot about the ethics of being honorable. We probably don't do enough about being articulate. We probably don't do enough about the professionalism, but I would hope that as you consider your quad chart and the things that you are talking about, the things that you're teaching, that you would also consider how are you in your class, in your field, in your sport, actually working with the midshipmen to develop these particular attributes. Okay? And again, I'll just tell you, this is a tool that I use in class, and I say, tell me how we're doing in this. And it's a very interesting response from midshipmen, because, and it's not a good response at this point, because they'll say, we are not focusing on this. And so I say, okay, where would you like to do a lot more? The one that generally comes up is, I want to become more articulate. I want to learn how to speak in public. Which is an important leadership exercise, an important leadership tool. But some of these things, how do you actually develop this? How do you actually measure these sorts of things? And it's just an important part of the conversation.
This is a little teaching nugget. You do that at the beginning of class, or is this kind of a wrap up of at the end of your semester? When do you work that in?
In A203, we have a section, and Roger will talk about this. We have a section where we talk about the Aristotelian virtues and character. And that's generally where I bring it in. Coach, you made me think maybe I need to present a little bit earlier. Are you just making me think? That's good, right? This is what this is all about.
Before.
Okay.
So this is great stuff. Right. What's our scorecard? Right. What's our scorecard?
Yeah. And thanks for continuing that conversation, because it's a big one for me. And the midshipmen they'll engage in this, and they'll give you where they think we as an institution are focusing and where we're doing well and where we are lacking. 9's a lot of attributes. Okay. Honor, courage, commitment. Those are 3 values. Okay. You can remember those. What are the 9 attributes? I don't know. So we need to kind of refresh ourselves periodically and think about that. So this is something we have been working on here in leadership, ethics, and law. And so I greatly appreciate the fact that we're talking about integration across the yard. We aren't really fully integrated across LEL. We still have work to do. And this really was an initiative that Captain Bernanke was really focusing on. Are we telling a story that's consistent throughout the 4-year experience at the Naval Academy? A story that connects the first chapter, the plebe year, the plebe summer when they come in, to the last chapter when they're getting ready to graduate. Along the way, do we give them insight? Do we give them experience? Do we give them this understanding of what it means to lead and lead well? And in this, are they transformed? Are they prepared for the roles that they're going to have in leadership? So this for us is, an exercise that we go through in LEL. And again, part of my position and part of my reasons for teaching 110, 203, 310, and being part of the exercises in L400. So I see the entire spectrum of what we do in this building. Okay. And that's, we try and pull this together, and we certainly encourage our instructors. Captain Mulaney has taught 2 of the courses, Commander Van Dam has taught 2 of the courses, and we have a couple other who have taught all 3 of the leadership courses. It's hard to teach the JAG courses because the law courses, the JAGs really have got a solid handle on that. But we bring other ethics instructors into the leadership courses to help facilitate some of those case studies. So this is what we have for the loose experience. There's an introduction to leadership during plebe summer that is worked through the character department working for the commandant. NL 110 is preparing to lead, and there's several assessments that they do to try and get a better understanding of who they are, what their backgrounds are, what their personalities might be, and how that might influence their team building ability and team ability. Okay. Ethics and moral reasoning, the NE 203. I mean, I've taught that course for almost 20 years now, and to me, it is really a solid course that continues to develop. But it's a most important course. How do you make good ethical decisions? And the standard response out of folks, and Captain Roger Herbert will talk about this, is midshipmen will come out at the end of this course and say, "You haven't told me what the answer is." Okay, we aren't giving them the answers. We're giving them tools to think about what their answers should be. Okay, and they are surprised often when we have these case studies. You say, "Who says yes? Who says no?" And the class is split. So, okay, who's right? Okay? And we don't grade on that particular right and wrong. We do grade on the thought process, bringing in the principles that we teach in the course. Leadership theory and application. And got to tell you, Zabato, this is a really important course, because what we do in this particular course is we have exercises that the midshipmen must do that are part of mentoring and the doing the counseling that they have to do within bancroft law. So we teach them how to do that as second class. But we try and pull these things together, and then we have this capstone where the law for the junior officer, you'll see it's a very important part, but we don't want them to leave just with that. And for those of us who are a little bit older and have graduated a number of years before, the curriculum that we saw as midshipmen was Navy law. Okay, as we're leaving, they say, "Don't break the law." That was our leadership experience in this building. Okay, the building, if you look outside, it's seamanship and navigation. Okay, it should be seamanship, navigation, ethics, and leadership, but it doesn't. And so, as a midshipman, we saw a law course, and that was it. Don't break the law. The bottom part here is this experiential, which is a very important part. Colonel Maria MJ Pallotta leads us, and these are things like going to Gettysburg. These are things like going on Knowles. These are really good experiential opportunities of small team leadership that we think we want to bring. Well, we don't think. We know we have to bring the elements of these 4 courses into that experience to give them and help them develop as a leader character. This is the way we think of what we do. We try and integrate things so that they see aspects of these courses through the 4 years. The capstone is something they do with the character development. Captain Tom Robertson runs that, and we bring in speakers, we bring in opportunities to kind of pull all these different elements together. But we talk about these things of golden threads. What are the things that we expect them to see through all of these courses? Oath of office. They need to understand that commitment. They need to be committed to that oath of office. The core values of the Navy, do they understand them? Do they know them? Officer attributes, we showed that. There's 9 of them we want. And then we want to make sure they got the same leadership terms because, of course, the courses, they have not always been. And, of course, the curriculum, they are not always the same. And we have these tools. We have the curriculum here. We do case studies. We have the experiential learning. And I'm excited about what Captain Mullaney is working on, which is midshipman e-portfolios, which is going to be a tool that when we have this up and running, we and you, especially as on a Bancroft Hall level, can go in and see what are the experiences they've had as midshipmen, what are the papers they've written, what are the assessments they've done. It's all in a singular file that we can get. And Google Docs has helped a lot, but having this e-portfolio is really going to be important. Now, I'm going to take just a little bit of sidelight and maybe some time from the others, because this is important to me. This is especially important to me. Immanuel Kant talks about perfect duty and imperfect duty. Okay? perfect duty is absolutely clearly understood. You know exactly what you are to do and not to do. And there's this imperfect duty that's, you probably should do it, but maybe not the mandate that you have to do it. And so when we talk about honor, we talk about the honor concept. If I could share, last week I was part of a working group, and they're talking about how to better develop the Order of Merit, which is a very, very important thing to midshipmen. And they want to understand the process. They want to understand what goes into it. And a part that goes into the Order of Merit is an evaluation of honor. How do you evaluate honor at the Naval Academy? It's binary. You're guilty of an honor offense or you're not. It's binary, okay? That's not what our honor concept says. Our honor concept is the combination of the perfect negative and the imperfect positive duty. And what I focus on in class, and what I try and have these other folks who are working on this aspect of Order of Merit, is focus on the imperfect positive. Midshipmen is a person of integrity. They stand for what is right. They tell the truth and ensure the truth is known. That's the imperfect positive. It's the right thing to do. How do you measure it? When do you do it? That's a little bit less clear. What is the perfect negative? Don't lie. The same on these others. Embrace fairness. Ensure your work. Get assistance when received. Do not cheat. That's a perfect negative. And the last is respect the property of others. Do not steal. And so we, in the class, we try and focus on how do we build on these imperfect positive instead of just focusing on don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal. And for me, this is important because as a midshipman, the honor concept was do not lie, do not cheat, do not steal. That was it. And I was really glad to see that over time they have integrated this imperfect positive as let's focus on doing the good things instead of just not doing the bad things. Okay. That's a personal thing for me. I continue to strive and push on this, and I hope that we can make some progress. Now, integration within LEL. And I don't want you to even, I think we sent you the flow charts, the maps, and what we have done so far, we continue to work on this, is each of our courses has a flow chart, and each of these courses has a little box which talks about the curriculum that we have. And you don't need to see what these, or really notice what these dots are, other than to understand that we see clearly that the terms are the same, the principles are the same across our curriculum. So in here, the green boxes are, in 110, you know what, you're going to see it again in ethics, in any 2 and 3. You see it in 110, you're going to see it again in the orange boxes in NL 310. Same terms, maybe different writers, maybe different case studies, but the principles are going to be the same. And we talk about NL 110, leadership is relationships, building relationships. Go through the same thing with any 203. You have things that you already saw in 110, you're going to see it in 310, and you're going to see it in the law course. Okay? Character, good leadership. And we are excited, and Roger will talk a lot more about this, but we're excited that over the past couple of years, we have done I won't say, it's a we, but it's a lot bigger than me, has done a thing to work through a moral deliberation roadmap. How do you make good moral decisions? It's a process that they should understand. NL 310, where leadership is a process, but this is where it really is team building. This is using the Midshipman Development Report. And you see, again, we have these different parts which are connected to NL 110, NL 203. And in our last course, law, where we want law to be a leadership tool. How do you use the UCMJ? How do you use your Captain's Master Scepter as a leadership tool, not just understanding here's what the rules are, don't break them. And that's a very big part of what we do in NL 400. So that's my quick overview of what we do in leadership ethics and law in the lead division. The position that I hold is sponsored by the class of 61, and I meet with them regularly, and they are honestly very active, very interested in what we do in this building, because as officers who graduated more senior to me, they also want to make sure that we are graduating leaders who will lead in harm's way. So what I would like to do now is to turn this over to a couple of our course directors for our different courses. And the first is NL 110, and that's Captain Kevin Mullaney, who right now is the assistant division director. And he was very kind to say he wasn't a Naval Academy graduate because he graduated from Notre Dame. Okay, so but oh, you're right here. Sorry, you didn't hit me.
You should be careful. Yeah.
So what I'd like to do is turn over to Kevin again. He's a permanent military professor here in LEL, and he has seen the broad spectrum, and he is also setting up our e-portfolio. So I'm going to stop sharing, and Kevin, if you would, we'll take it from there.
All right. So for ethics across the curriculum, I've spent probably the last 5 years really focused on our fleet leadership course. And so what I wanted to do is just kind of talk about the ways that I think our fleet leadership course informs this conversation of ethical decision making. So the formal name of our course is Preparing to Lead. I think some informal names that I use for the course is How to Be Good at Being a Person. With a leader, there's a distinction that leadership educators make between leader development and leadership development. So leader development is focused on the individual, leadership development is focused on kind of the skill set in the organization. And so that's one distinction you can make between our PLEAD course and our junior level course, is that the PLEAD level course is probably more focused on leader development, and the second class course is focused on the leadership. So it brings in the wider context of the organization and those kinds of dynamics. Whereas the PLEAD leadership course is mostly focused on the individual. So I think a fair title for the course could also be The Foundations of Moral Psychology. And that's probably not a term that's intimately familiar to everybody, moral psychology. So one of the things I'll do is both describe what we do in the course and at the same time kind of introduce what moral psychology is in the first place. An assertion, decision-making happens in the mind. Ethical decision-making is a form of decision-making that brings values into play in that decision-making process. So ethical decision-making takes place in the mind. So that's kind of what the foundation of moral psychology is, the idea of understanding the way that the mind processes information, understands the world, and how that informs our decision-making. So through the course of NL 110, some topics that we explore that I think inform this moral psychology, I've tried to represent these as questions. So how much of our decision-making are we aware of, are we conscious of? So if you're familiar with the work of like Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow, the place where decision researchers are at this point is that the vast majority of our decision-making is actually probably driven by our preconscious processes. So we're probably not fully conscious of the majority of decisions that we're making, which kind of raises the question, so where then are our decisions coming from? How does the mind perceive and understand the world about which it makes decisions? So we talk about perception, and we talk about biases within our perceptual processes. I think this is really important. I think one of the major realizations in the decision sciences is this idea that judgment precedes decision, right? So what does that mean? It means that we're sitting in a room, our mind constructs an understanding of the world that we inhabit, and in the process of constructing the world that we live in, it's not a value neutral construction, right? So we value the people in this room. As we experience this room, we value the people in this room in a certain way, right? And those values that we bring to our construction of our understanding of the world actually inform our decision making. And so our preconscious, unconscious mind is actually bringing a lot of judgments into our experience of the world, and those judgments are then informing our decision. This is one of the foundations of moral psychology, is understanding kind of how cognitive psychology informs the way we interpret the world, and the way our interpretation of the world then informs our decision making. So this is something that we explore, not completely explicitly with the students, but this is kind of the ground that we're investigating with them. And our aim at this point is more towards self-awareness. In as much as we're trying to develop the leaders, they need to be self-aware. So we're exploring these: who are you? Where do your thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and behaviors come from? And if much of this is driven by pre-conscious, unconscious processes, how do we gain awareness and understanding of what those processes are? So I'll jump down one or two there. So specifically, what process does the mind use to make decisions? So we lean on the recognition prime decision, which is a specific model that describes the mental processes. And then we explore things like personality. So how does the personality, our factory settings, if you will, how do those shape the way that we interpret the world around us, and how do they shape the way that our kind of fundamental instincts about how we should respond to the world? And the more you dig into that, the more profound I think that becomes. That we're much more different than we think that we are. We kind of project ourselves on other people and assume that everybody is thinking and feeling and understanding things the same way that we are. And that's probably not terribly true. We think about social situations and how being in a social situation actually shapes our understanding and the way that we respond to the world. We explore the socialization processes. So when we talk about the mind interpreting the world, we all have kind of this grab bag of concepts and schemas that we carry around with us. And those are the things, arguably, that we use to interpret the world around us. So the question is, where does that grab bag of schemas and concepts come from? So formal education is one way, but then also just our experience of the world and our interactions with other people. And so those are captured in our curriculum in exploring processes of socialization. So how do we learn things from other people and from the environment that we inhabit? How are those understandings of how the world works consolidated into a culture so that we come to have to some degree, a shared understanding of the world around us, and how are our values actually built into those shared understandings? So we don't really use the word moral psychology so much with our students, but we're exploring these foundations of moral psychology in our process of helping them towards self-awareness. I'll pause there just in case there's any questions about that. That was a lot to throw at you. I'm sorry. I could literally spend 45 hours talking about all these topics, because that's what we do with students. So the class is broken into I would say 4 sections. So the first section is really about self-awareness. So understanding, like I said, where our thoughts, feelings, behaviors come from. And then once we hopefully gain some understanding of what's going on behind the curtains of our own mind, what can we do to exercise control and intentionality over ourselves? That's kind of self-control piece. We then think about, what does excellence look like? And I think that's important from a ethics perspective, because in some ways, what we think of as excellent is what we define as the good, right? And in our ethical decision making, arguably, oftentimes what we're doing is we're trying to promote the good and perhaps prevent the bad. And so a good understanding of what the good is, I think, informs that. And then we move into leadership. So I'll just show 2 other things real quick. So this is the second part of the class, the self-control piece. So really what we're trying to do is we're trying to give students the tools that they would need to build their own character. So that's why I like to think of the class as how to be good at being a person. These are really the specific skills, arguably, not all of them, but some of the most important ones that one would use to construct oneself. So first you have to be able to reflect on yourself and understand, gain that self-awareness of why you're thinking, feeling, and doing the things that you're doing. We teach them a specific set of disciplines, the ability to delay gratification, take responsibility, communicate, be committed to a deep understanding of what truth is, and balancing. We look at discipline as life is painful, but with these disciplines, you can take the pain of life and you can transform it into growth. Whereas life is going to be painful one way or another, so it can either promote growth or it can just be painful. And with these disciplines, these are kind of like the key tools that we use to create growth. Emotional intelligence, so the ability to become aware of the emotions that we're experiencing at any given time, to understand what the roots and source of those emotions are, and to develop the skill sets to accommodate the emotions that we have within ourselves, and then also the same process with other people. How are you feeling? Why are you feeling that way? What can I do to facilitate you moving through those emotions productively? Creating and managing purpose, and then critical thinking processes. So all of these are the self-control skills of developing character.
Can I ask a really tough question?
Certainly.
This is pretty heady stuff to me. How does this go with the plebes?
So, it's the tragedy of our course is like it's a 5-hour bus tour of Rome, is what it feels like. There's a lot of good stuff, and we move pretty quickly through it. That being said, I mean, I think we benefit from the fact that we do have small section sizes, so we're typically dealing with 15 to 20 students. And what I would say is I don't think every student gets all of it. I think that as they pass through it, they recognize the value of it. And so in some ways, hopefully we're setting them up for some lifelong learning. And I would also say that there are particular students that have particular needs. And what I find is that the students with particular needs in a topic usually kind of focus on that and engage with that. So what I hope is that as the students move through the content, they at least get the parts that they need the most, and they have the opportunity to engage with those. But I agree with you very much. Oh, this is what I tell them is I enjoy teaching this every single semester because I can talk about this endlessly, but it doesn't mean I'm good at it, right? Frankly, teaching this content is constantly transformative in my own life because this is the stuff of life.
But if I could, Coach, one of the things that the staff has done over time is they've developed quite a few little exercises that are both physical speaking. They're doing something to demonstrate some of these things. So it causes them very quickly to get up, to move around, and to make some connection to what the concepts are to an exercise that they do in class.
We try to maintain a balance. We try to make sure that everything we do is founded on the best possible science. But the advantage is this isn't a Psych 101 course. It's not a Sociology 101 course. It's not a Philosophy 101 course. It draws from all of those. It's nice because I don't feel like I have a responsibility to teach them the history of psychology like I would if it were a Psych 101 class. Instead, I can just cherry pick what I think is most valuable to the individuals from those domains and try to deliver them in a way that's digestible and practical. That is the challenge, but I think we're, as Doug said, I think we have great instructors that are constantly thinking about the problem and the engagement piece, and it's very collegial, and we're sharing best practices all the time, trying to do that.
If I may answer, so certainly kind of taught both courses, and just the idea of what we're doing here in LEL, since it's not a psychology course, but there is psychology in, especially in a 110, a little bit in 203. But what we tell the mids is you're not gonna remember this, but you're gonna remember something about it when you have to apply it to a scenario. So they might remember 10 years later, man, I vaguely remember hearing about that when I was a plebe in class, and it's helping them make the connection again, not necessarily what what's going on in the mind, but what they have to do with it. I think that kind of gets it part of our mission here.
Right. And hopefully there's some precedents that we get to do this first. And so hopefully that helps them see what we're talking about and let that reverberate in other experiences. The third piece of the class, the way I conceptualize at least, is what does human excellence look like? So we talk about resilience and the ability to sustain oneself. but then also the flip side of that, flow and optimal performance. How can we do that on purpose? Almost every athlete has had that day where they just couldn't miss. And we feel like that's accidental, but as you dig into the psychology of it, that might actually be something that we can do on purpose. Love thinking about that as excellence in relationships, and we use a very specific definition for that. That love is the intentional effort for another person's growth, which that moves pretty easily into the concept of leadership. And then we look at a few select virtues: integrity, loyalty, ownership, and civility and respect.
Do you connect these to the attributes at all?
That is an excellent question, and I would say no, we do not. But I think that's an enormous opportunity that we're probably missing. So I'll take that as my homework. That's my homework for the workshop.
One more insight on integrity and loyalty. They come in conflict a lot. So,
well, so do they? I mean, it's interesting.
Sometimes.
I think the way that students conceptualize loyalty makes it a conflict when it might not be. Is loyalty a virtue if it causes us to do unvirtuous things? One of the ways we address that is we ask them, what's the mission of the Naval Academy? Develop midshipmen morally, mentally, and physically. Whose mission is that? Is that the soup's mission, the commandant's mission, your mission, my mission, or is it the midshipman's mission? And we leverage off this concept of love. If you actually loved your fellow midshipmen, you would be putting in intentional effort for their growth. So they come they ask you to sign their tap and go or whatever it is, right? Can you justify your loyalty as intentional effort for their growth in that moment? Just covering for their faults. I think if we can push it all the way, loyalty down to the fullness of love, then it becomes less of a conflict for them. Hopefully, yeah. What I hope we accomplish in class and what we actually accomplish in class, I'm sure is vastly different. So that's what I aspire to, is to try to get them to that point. So that's how I think NL 110 has the opportunity and the potential to contribute to conversations of ethics through kind of laying the foundations for moral psychology, for laying the foundations for intentional development of character, and for providing concepts of what the good is.
Kevin mentioned reflections, and honestly, one of the things that has surprised me, the midshipmen are much more accustomed to journaling than I ever would have imagined. And so we encourage them in each of the courses to doing reflections that are part of journaling. Some of those are graded, some of them that are just looked at, some of them we just ask them to do it. But it's certainly a tool that across the curriculum could be helpful to have them be journaling and thinking about what they're doing. For those of us who've done remediation, we know that the journaling is a huge tool in having the midshipmen reflect on their situation, on tough questions, and to regularly go back to those sorts of things. Good.
That's all
I have. Good. So what I'd like to do is shift to the youngster course that we have, NE 203. Captain Roger Herbert is on the line here. And Roger, if you could bring yourself up and talk about what we are doing, what we've done in NE 203.
Okay. Well, hi, everybody. By the way, am I up? I thought I was already up. No? Yes? Got me?
You're up. We got you loud and clear, and we got your slide showing, Roger.
Beautiful. Thank you. Again, I'm sorry I can't be there in person. I sure hope I can be there tomorrow. So what I wanted to talk about briefly, and I think I will try to keep this brief since we're really going to be doing a deep dive into this tomorrow. I want to talk about why we teach ethics at the Naval Academy. That may sound obvious, but maybe it's not. We didn't for a long time, and then how we teach ethics. So we'll start with the why. I mean, so for the first part, it's in the mission to develop midshipmen morally. And I think that we put morally first for a reason, because how important that is in officership, morally, mentally. And there's no physical component yet to NE 203, but I think we're working on that. Another reason we teach ethics at the Naval Academy is that, well, Congress told us to do it. In the 1991 Defense Authorization Act, they directed all the service academies to establish ethics curricula. Now the naval services are very independent services, so we took a sort of a different take on this than our colleagues at West Point and USAFA. I'll talk about that a little bit later, probably. But yes, they told us to do it. So in 1995, we stood up this program. Another reason. So this is an interesting analysis. Now it's kind of old. It's this was an analysis that was done over a 20-year period. From 1992 to 2012, and these are the data from 2012. But they're all, they were all very stable throughout that 20-year period. So this is America's high schoolers. Kind of a good news story to start off with. So almost everybody believes that it's important to be a person of good character, and 92% think, yeah, I'm a person of good morals and character. I'm good to go. And in fact, 3/4 of them believe that they're better off. They are better morally than most of their colleagues. So I guess this is a good news story. But the problem is, over the past year, these people who think that, character is important and I'm a person of good character, 81% had lied to a parent, 62% had lied to a teacher, a third had plagiarized on a paper, most have cheated on a test, and 1/4 have stolen either from a parent or from a store. So the bottom line is, and this isn't one of these kids today things. I mean, there is, and there probably always has been, a significant delta between sort of what society at large considers to be acceptable moral behavior and what we in the Navy and the Marine Corps and the Naval Academy believe is acceptable moral behavior. Another reason we teach ethics at the Naval Academy is that our nation trusts us. So from 1989 through 2019, the military was of all institutions was the most trusted by the American public. People my age and older know that was just not always the case. And in fact, there was a time where the military was almost reviled. And that trust really is important for many things, but if the military continues to be a trusted institution, well, moms and dads will continue to encourage their sons and daughters to come and serve in the military. So there's many reasons for that. But we also have to recognize that trust is fragile. We can
slide a little hard, Roger. The slide's a little hard to read. So if I could, this is a Gallup poll that's done annually, okay? And the question is, what is the confidence that you have in this institution? And the very top line is the military. The second line is small business. Then it goes through police, higher education, organized religion, presidency, Supreme Court, medical systems, banks, public schools, organized labor, big business, newspapers, criminal justice system, television, and Congress. And we often say, so, okay, remember, these are the people you voted for. And while they may like their congressperson, they don't like the process of. But that's what this number represents. And this number out here, 74%, have a great amount, have a great deal or a very much confidence in these organizations. That's the differentiation between these organizations. So Roger, sorry to have interrupted, but the slide was hard to read.
Yeah, no worries. I appreciate that. But by the way, we just got beat out by a small business in the 2020 survey. I just checked that. Small business was 75% had a great deal or quite a lot of confidence, and we were at 72% in 2020. But the bottom line is that trust is fragile, and we have to protect that, and we cannot allow incidents like Abu Ghraib to send us to those bad old days that some of us remember all too well. So everybody recognizes that guy stepping out of the cockpit. He was prior to, we sort of worship at the altar of James Stockdale over here in Lewis Hall, and that's a great altar to worship at. Frankly, this is an extraordinary man. Prior to serving in Vietnam, he spent some time at Stanford University. And a beloved professor kind of said, I think you're going to find some interest in some of these writings since you're given your military background. And this professor introduced Stockdale to the philosopher Epictetus, as well as other Stoic philosophers. And when he was shot down, he swears this is true. It sounds apocryphal, but he swears it's true. But as he's under canopy, about to experience a huge life change, he thought to himself, and he said out loud, "I'm leaving the world of technology, and I'm entering the world of Epictetus." As the senior POW in the Hanoi Hilton, he put these practices, these ideas into practice, and he applied them, and he taught his fellow prisoners how to apply these to the severe situation they're in. The bottom line is that the tools that we are providing our students here, no kidding, they could save a life. And not just maybe the lives of our students or the moral lives of our students, but also the physical or moral lives of the people that they lead. Okay, so how do we teach ethics at the Naval Academy? We organize our course around four big questions. We start with just how do I recognize what my moral obligations are? And we start with moral perception, because if you don't recognize that you have certain moral obligations, you're not going to know that, yes, now it's time for me to deliberately think through these. you won't even engage in. And the number of sort of ethical mistakes that were made by not seeing that you were confronting a no kidding moral dilemma are significant. So what we look at during our moral perception block is we look at some of those cultural cues or cognitive biases that can, to some extent, they can highlight, they can shine a flashlight and show us what's salient in the moral landscape. But they can also obfuscate. And so knowing that those are out there is valuable. Okay, we then turn to the fundamental question of ethics, and that is what is the right thing to do? We introduce our students to 4 moral factors, and we ask them to think through these sequentially. Starting with constraints, those things that we can't, or must do out of respect for other humans as humans. We then turn to consequentialist reasoning, thinking through what are going to be the optimal outcomes for most people. Then we think about what are our special obligations. Okay, so those duties that we take on that others might not have, duties that we've taken on because of our roles, our relationships, or, and very importantly to our students, promises that we've made. So they will have all made promises to support and defend the Constitution, a very important special obligation. And then the final moral factor is character. Character helps us in the moral deliberation process in a couple ways. One is we ask ourselves, okay, how is this action, how is this choice going to affect my character? But we also can ask ourselves, all right, well, what would a person of good character, of exemplary moral character do in a given situation, which can be a great shortcut to understanding what is the right thing to do. We're going to go very deep into this tomorrow, but taken together, these 4 moral factors are what we call the moral deliberation roadmap. I'll mention briefly, we've been, the curriculum that we now have adopted, and in fact, fall semester, we will all of the NE 203 students will be singing off the same sheet of music. But we have been piloting this new program for about 4 years, and it's finally come into fruition. And I think one of the chief innovations of this new program is the moral deliberation roadmap, an actual framework for how I'm going to think through a moral dilemma. The third block is our moral excellence block, and we think about, okay, so what virtues should I cultivate in order to navigate difficult moral choices? What sort of person should I be? And what the virtue ethicists say is, you don't need these rules and all these rules about how to work through a moral dilemma. If you're a good and virtuous person, you're going to make good and virtuous decisions. So we look at two of the biggest virtue ethics schools, the Aristotelian tradition and also the Stoic tradition. We spend some time with maybe some of the key virtues that our folks should have. So we think about pride and humility, and we think about courage. And we end this block by talking about moral injury, which is so I served for 26 years. I'd never heard this term. Until I got here, as I started diving into this idea of moral injury, a lot of things in my past and things that some of my colleagues may have been suffering from it just started making sense. And moral injury is just another, one of those invisible injuries, but it's not. It might look like post-traumatic stress, but both causes and potentially cures are different. And I think we'll be talking about that tomorrow as well. And then our final block is it focuses on the question of how do I fight and win honorably. And it turns out that this is not a new question. We've been thinking about it for thousands of years, we as human beings. And so we dive into the just war tradition for our final block. I'll pause for a second and ask if there are any questions on our course map.
If I could just add that the core part is a very important part, which also is why we feel it's very important that we teach this course to youngsters, because the just war part and bringing in moral injury and talking about that is something that we want them to think very hard about before they sign 2%. And it really is an important aspect of the course.
Yeah, that is a great contribution, Doug. They are going to be signing their 2 for 7s, and you wonder, have these guys really thought about what is being asked of them? I mean, ultimately, they may be asked to take another human life, and that's always going to be morally problematic. So we hope that they will have already done some of this work through this thought process. But if not, we'll help them think through this. And if all of a sudden they realize, it's like, no, I don't know if I can do it, this is probably a good time to know that.
I have a question. So this is a great opportunity with all these LEL instructors in the room. This happened very early on when I was first starting at the academy. I was talking to a third-class chemistry major, so I was teaching lab. We were in lab together, and this person was also taking ethics, which at the time is I think different from what you have now, because it's evolved, right? This is almost 20 years ago, and I never been asked to take an ethics course as an undergraduate. I still haven't taken one, but I was really interested. I was asking this person to share what they were learning and how they were approaching it. And this midshipman just was very, I would say, dismissive of the course and said, it's not useful. It's like, really? It sounds incredibly useful to me, just based on what I know about it. And he said, well, it's because I already know what I'm going to do in every situation. And yet in this room, right, in this hour or two that we spent together, the word dilemma has come up multiple times. And everything that I hear you all talking about is nuances, right? It's evaluative. And so I just love to hear your perspectives on, and this is an anecdote, this is not data, right? I'm not saying, evaluating the course based on this one person's comment. How you think about the way to move someone away from that certainty that they already know what they're going to do.
I think the best way is through, so one of the changes that we made in the course was we start off with what I find to be a really difficult case that I don't know what to do with. And we have several of those in the course. So the case that we start off with is actually dealing with a practice in Afghanistan where young boys are taken to serve older gentlemen, and a mother comes to the American servicemen in the area and says that I find this problematic. More than that, obviously. And then what do you do if you're in this situation? You go to your chain of command and they say that it's not something that we can change. And it's based on a real life case. It was in the Army, not the Navy or Marine Corps. But we hope that it hits the students in the face with a difficult choice that maybe they just don't know. You guys are going to read for tomorrow, actually, one of my favorite cases from the course, and we're going to talk about it. And I will just let you know, Roger and I have different opinions, like pretty strong different opinion on what is the right thing to do there. And I trust Roger. The fact that Roger thinks that the opposite thing is the right thing to do makes me really question whether I'm right about this decision, right? And I think it's a hard case. And so I think that that's a great way to get students to question that kind of certainty, is just present them with the real world. Because it turns out the real world is tough a lot of times. And a lot of times when you have these tensions and these conflicts, it's not so clear. I mean, maybe that comes with age. Maybe when I was 20, I thought everything was easier than it is. You know, modern physics made me think that things were harder than perhaps I thought they were. Both the actual class and like figuring out how that works. But I don't know if that answers the question, but that's the way we try to hit the students in the mouth, actually, is to try to say, listen, this isn't as easy as you think. It's not all like, do you sign up for TAPS or not, right? There are lots of cases in which like, Roger, I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
No, I only to say that's exactly how I would have answered that question too. And I think that after you come away from NE 203, hopefully you'll come away with this feeling. It's like, look, I've got resources that I can reach back to that are going to help me with this. But I think you've also got to come away from NE 203 thinking kind of, oh crap, this is going to be hard. You know, this is really in the military, we play for a very high degree of difficulty in moral reasoning. That if I go on to be a CPA or something, I probably don't have to deal with the same level of same degree of difficulty of moral choices, and so. Through our case studies, and one of the things that I like about the case study that you all are reading for tomorrow is this is a recent Naval Academy grad. This is you just, you know, a couple years after you threw your hat up in the air. And so that should grab people's attention.
I will say as well, I think, and just to foreshadow a little bit tomorrow, we'll talk about this in great detail tomorrow. I think some of you will be really interested in the kind of moral deliberation roadmap and thinking about case studies and deliberation and about I bet your project is, from hearing you earlier today, it's going to be based around like, this is a case study, we need to think about what the right thing to do is make that decision. The other thing though that the course focuses on that I assume a lot will be interested in is the kind of character piece, right? And the interesting thing about character is, for at least many people, and the people that are most right, I think this, is that's an ideal we're always striving towards, right? So that's not easy either, right? Because we're always going to fall short of that ideal. If you talk about like what it is to be courageous or have appropriate pride or humility or temperance, right? That's something that, you know, is, I tell my students, is a work in progress every day. We had a professor actually would walk around with a laminated card in his wallet on the 5 virtues that he was working on, like that he thought he could be better on. He would like show it to the students. I mean, he's a better person than me. He has it written down on a laminated card. So he's already like closer to the ideal. But so I think that's another way to kind of get the students away from this is easy. Because if you think about, and I think a lot of our students have that already, kind of that notion, right, that we're striving to be better. Even if, to kind of go back to what Doug said earlier, even if I kind of am meeting the minimal standard, right? I'm not stealing from banks. I'm not lying to my CO, right? I might still need to work to be better at this particular virtue. We do exercises on that, and you know, some projects might well be. I just want to focus on this particular virtue. I want my athletes, my students to be better at whatever virtue it is.
You brought up this great point that at the time I spoke to this division, I think they were 3rd class, so they were very young, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, their being youthful is what surprised me about their certainty. you know, because I would have thought that being youthful kind of, you can step back and say, I haven't seen the world, I don't know as much, you know, I know what I don't know. So there came the opportunity a few years ago. This person was selected for medical corps, became a doctor, and we routinely invite our alums back to speak to the other midshipmen who are interested in medical corps. And this person was on the list, and I was like, this is great because I'm going to get a chance to ask this person, you know, plus years away from graduation, are they still sure? And I did have that opportunity, and he said he was still absolutely sure. No moral dilemma.
Well, I mean, it's better that he's in medicine now, because as recently as 40 years ago, people used to lie to their patients about whether they had cancer. So, I mean, that's a profession that's radically changes ethics in recent times.
Okay. Hey, thanks for that conversation. I just want to bring up one more idea of how we teach ethics at the Naval Academy. So I mentioned that we took a somewhat different approach when Congress told us to set this thing up. So they're great. We need to have a course in moral philosophy. So West Point and Air Force, they hire a couple dozen moral philosophers and build a curriculum, go to town. That seems to be like the logical thing to do, but in typical Navy fashion, we said no, we can do it for less, and so we hired I think 5 PhD philosophers, and brought in Rick Rubel, who's actually pictured in there, and he was an engineer at the time, which is about right. I mean, if you're going to try to piece something together, that's what engineers do. Here you got some baling wire and you've got some riggers tape. Fix this, and they did, and they put together the way that we approach this. We created this team teaching environment where we pair up senior military officers with people like Professor Hidal, who when he's on vacation he gets his picture with Socrates, and we may have done that in the beginning to save a few bucks or something, I don't know, but as it turns out, I think that's what makes our course the best moral philosophy courses of the service academies, and maybe in the world. We're completely unique in that we've got this great combination of both theoretical and applied ethics, and applied directly to the field that these guys are going into. So it turned out to be a great strategy for us. And again, we're going to be going into all of this in far greater detail tomorrow. But I'm willing to take any questions you have for me before that.
Roger, I think we're good. And I think in anticipation, we will look forward to 3 hours of you tomorrow instead of just 20 minutes of you today. So, thank you.
Great.
So Jeff, if I could, as it turns out Tom has another engagement he has to get to. So if we can take a break after we talk about it, if we can let Tom talk about that now, that'd be appreciated.
Okay.
All right.
Very well.
Good. Thank you. You're up here,
Thank you. Tom, before we turn it over to you, if anybody needs to take a break, feel free to get up and do so. Okay.
All right. So Tom is, as he said, he's one of our, like we call him, permanent military instructors at this point. So he's a lieutenant commander Navy helicopter pilot who is going to be here for
1 more.
I mean,
4 more years.
4 more years as an instructor. Go ahead.
Sorry to keep you all here. I promise this won't take too long, but
what we do now that we've talked about the plea leadership and the ethics course, what we really have tried to do with NL 310 is we make it the culminating, okay, now what? What do you do knowing yourself? What do you do knowing a little bit about ethical dilemmas, hopefully not knowing all the answers yet. But what we're trying to get them to do is understand, and the name of the course is Leadership Theory and Application, taking the theories that academics write about and talk about leadership, and now applying it to what they're doing in the hall. Squad leaders as second class, squad leaders, platoon commanders, company commanders, and above as first class. And then really when they get to the fleet, when they're in their small units, how are they going to lead these small units based on the foundations that we've presented to them here in Luce Hall. A real quick snapshot, I won't cover this entire slide, but a couple things to touch on here. So what are we doing? So the idea is to shift the students' focus from this leader-centric kind of individual idea of leadership to a performance-based relationship of leadership. And what does it mean to work with a team and actually lead that team in order to accomplish a goal? And then really you can see is that the coursework, foundations, ethical, and critical thinking. So we're constantly referring back to 110 and 203. I think one of the things that Dr. Rao has been so good at, and we're continuing to do this, is making sure that we are connecting all these courses so that the midshipmen, most importantly, see, I get it. You know, we talked about this stuff on day one, plebe summer. We're talking about it again in this application course, and we'll see it again in the law. So they see this on a constant basis. So again, they don't necessarily have to memorize the theory or the psychology behind leadership, but they're able to apply the things that kind of stick in their mind, stick in their habits, so that they can do these things on a daily basis. This is our map, again, similar to the other courses. I think this has been shared with you, we're happy to share it again. The big thing to focus on is the bottom diagram, and I'll get into that and how it's developed. But that is what we call the process model of leadership, and it's even evolved a little bit, and it continues to evolve. But I'll talk through that here shortly. So some of the themes of the course, you can see the 4 themes on the left that we try to incorporate implicitly throughout the entire course. So we're constantly referring back to what it means to be intentional in developing yourself as a leader, having ethics, understanding what character means so that people see it, the people that you're working with, the people that you lead see it on a daily basis. The idea of diversity, equality, and really how that lends itself to a diversity of thought so that we incorporate everybody's ideas to find the best solution and accomplish the mission in the best way, the most ethical way, getting to the right answer. And then the idea of resilience, obviously, is a big topic throughout the country right now in the military, and that's one of the superintendent's big pillars, is how do we create this idea of warrior toughness and incorporating resilience into our day-to-day leadership style so that we are demonstrating resilient thought to our team members. So the course, we've developed this idea of an interactual framework. This came directly out of the textbook that we use from McGraw-Hill, and it's really the joining of the leader, the follower, so the entire team, and then the situation, and how the situation affects that relationship that we talk about so heavily in NL 110. You know, the idea of building relationships. What does the situation do to me leading an individual sailor or Marines, me leading a group of sailor or Marines, in maybe in a combat environment versus a non-combat environment? And what we've done is created this process model to help us get to an outcome that we call leadership effectiveness. What are we really striving for as a leader? And we connect this entire process. And again, if we take that this interactual framework Venn diagram, put it in a more linear model to where we have the understanding of ourselves as a leader. And we go back to some of the foundations of NL 110 and make the connection to this is who we are as leaders. This is how we have to demonstrate our values, our beliefs, our knowledge, skills, and abilities so that our team members see who we are on a daily basis. And they make that connection. Talk about authentic leadership, ethical leadership, which we'll get into a definition that we use here in a second. But it's really letting our team members see the connection between what we believe and how we're going to act. And obviously the situation is going to play a role in that on a daily basis. And We just have to be able to be flexible enough to recognize the situation and recognize where our behaviors may shift from time to time. Because really, as we can look at different definitions of leadership, and there's plenty of them out there, but they all in some way, shape, or form talk about an influence process where we're trying to influence a group of people to accomplish a goal or a mission. So what we're really trying to do is connect who we are, demonstrated by our behaviors, in order to influence our follower or team member behaviors. So what we're really trying to do is steer them in a certain direction in order to accomplish our mission, meet certain outcomes, and how we measure ourselves based on that leadership, that team environment effectiveness, vice just what we are doing individually. So again, it's about the team, it's about the organization of the unit. What are we getting to, and then how are we doing? So that's the reflection piece that we try to incorporate using experiential learning on a daily basis. Are we connecting ourselves to any 203? Do you remember back to plea leadership? We talked about personality, we talked about emotional intelligence, we talked about critical thinking. Now, how are we applying those tenets into, hey, here's a scenario where you have to shoot somebody or you don't, or you go into a building or you don't. We're trying to give the midshipmen those kind of preemptive experiences. And not only just when they get to the fleet, but also, hey, what are you going to do in the hall as a squad leader? What are you going to do on the athletic field as a team captain or a team member as an upper class? We break up the last block, leadership effectiveness, into what we call the 2 R's. And here's an ethical dilemma in itself. What is more important? We're all the military is a results-driven organization. Right? Task accomplished, mission accomplishment is and should be a focus. Where does the balance come in from the individual, especially the lower level leaders, where we balance, hey, what's more important, getting this mission done or making sure that everybody comes home safely? That retention piece we break up into not only the retention of keeping people in the military or keeping people in your unit, but also just this idea of taking care of your sailors and Marines, right? Work-life balance, work-life integration. Is there a divide in the military as 24/7, constant professional military officers? Where does that line come in? And it's blurry. When do you give people time to be with their families, and when do you say, hey, we have to get the mission done. We have to get the ship ready to deploy, to get underway. And a lot of times, especially because of the nature of the mission here at the Naval Academy, which is, in theory, on paper, develop midshipmen morally, mentally, and physically, where is the measurement tool? We're not getting a ship underway, right? Are we talking about graduating themselves? Like we've covered here a little more how midshipmen, yes, we should graduate ourselves morally, mentally, and physically, but we also have to do that for others and help those around us to get to that point. So the balance comes in, and this is where a lot of our discussions come back to the ethics class. What's more important, and how do we balance and how do we justify getting the job done and maybe sacrificing some of our sailors and Marines? So that's kind of the crux of the course as we go throughout the semester. Is making that balance and helping the midshipmen to understand that sometimes there is a right answer. Hey, we have to get underway, and sometimes there's not. And where do you make the decision as the individual unit leader to sometimes stand up for your sailors, stand up to a senior officer and say, hey, sir, man, we need a break. My troops, my sailors, my Marines, they're going to break if we don't take a break ourselves. There's something about that, right? If you go back one slide, it's predictability, right? I mean, when you look at results of retention, as leadership is, predictability in a certain environment. I'm always going back to resiliency and the importance of building that to be able to handle some of those decisions. And just want to provide that input there. Yeah, yes, sir, absolutely. Expectation management is something that I talk about all the time in NL 310. When you are leading people, it's one thing to talk about how you're going to lead. It's one thing to understand who you are and the decisions you make when you read about case studies. It's another to be put in that environment. And that's something that we try to do in classes. We make this class experiential as best we can. We put them in scenarios where they have to have uncomfortable situations with each other, with sailors that we pull from waterfront, with company officers that we bring in from the hall. Okay, here's a scenario, now actually do it and practice it in class. And something that Dr. Rao has really emphasized across or within our building and in the hall, we mentioned it before, is the counseling project. How do we integrate or how do we practice having difficult conversations with our subordinates in the hall to practice this, put this into play, actually counsel somebody on their performance, and then reflect upon that ourselves as the midshipman. How did you do? Get the feedback from the person you're counseling to be able to kind of evaluate yourself and your development. Now, throughout the course, ethical leadership is a theme that we harp upon and come back to on a daily basis. And something that we use is the difference between being a moral person that the midshipmen have learned about and now putting that into practice as a moral leader. It's not enough to talk about doing the right thing, having personal integrity, but you have to demonstrate that on a daily basis. And we're able to integrate stories that we hear from, and midshipman stories that we hear from the athletic field and Bancroft Hall, where this maybe doesn't always happen. And we can talk about why and put ourselves in scenarios where maybe we can make a change. And maybe the midshipman can recognize, oh, here's an opportunity for me to act as a moral manager. And it's not enough for me to sit in class and say, hey, I would do the right thing. Well, actually go do the right thing. Here's a connection between moral manager and ethical leadership into our leadership process model. And I'll skip through real quick. This definition on the left is something that is a definition that I like to use for leadership in general, but it really highlights what we're getting at, this idea about a moral manager. The demonstration of normatively appropriate conduct. And we break this up into three parts. So they focused in ethics about kind of what is normatively appropriate conduct. But now we're talking about what does that mean for a leader that puts signs up, that has mission statements, that acts on a daily basis, that comes to work in uniform or not in uniform, on time or not on time, goes to work out and actually demonstrates what he or she values from their team and their organization, and how that connects, how that aligns with the overall mission of the ship, of the Constitution. So when we relate it back to the hall, when you're acting in your squadron on your team, how does that align with what the superintendent wants us to do and what the public and the tenets of the Naval Academy expect from us as midshipmen and as junior leaders? Interpersonal relationships. So again, this idea of working with people to accomplish a goal, and then the promotion of such conduct. So that goes back to leader behaviors through two-way communication, reinforcements, and decision-making. And again, there are some parentheticals in there. How do we reinforce things? Well, through ethical standards. How do we demonstrate proper decision-making and using diverse thought process when we critically think through problems, and actually verbalizing that to our sailors and Marines, to our midshipmen that are in our squad or our company, so that people understand on a daily basis we are putting these things into practice. And then also that two-way communication piece comes on the back end as well. We talk about authentic leadership, and that's, if we ask midshipmen to label themselves as leaders, authentic leadership or servant leadership would probably be one of the most commonly used terms. And the idea that some of the midshipmen miss is the piece of authentic leadership doesn't mean always doing the right thing or always making the best decision. It's coming back and recognizing that, discussing it with the people that you're leading so that they understand where you're coming from and they can kind of get on board to get to the right outcome. That is the NL310 course in a nutshell. Captain Rao, Dr. Rao has taught the course in the past. Dr. McCrease will be teaching with us here in the future. So we, have obviously here in LEL a wealth of knowledge to integrate these themes, throughout the department and throughout Bancroft Hall. And as we, do this, integrate throughout the yard. So happy to answer any questions.
Hey, could you go back to the last slide? I mean, I just, when I look at this, and I just, instead of saying leader, for example, look at just father. I just look at this, okay, father behaviors, father behaviors will be our children, our spouses, right? The effectiveness and respect to results, retention, right? I think, personalizing some of these approaches, you can really personalize this and really, apply it right back into what we're trying to do with our midshipmen, which in essence, for all of us who have, we feel like they are part of parental lives in that sense?
Yeah, absolutely, sir. I mean, one of the things that the midshipmen always want, particularly from this course, but all the courses here in LEL, is, hey, give us sea stories. Tell us about that time you did this. And the challenge that we have to all our instructors, and when we sit down on day one, is shape your experiences to fit what the lesson that we're talking about. And to Captain Frankie's point, you know, the more I study leadership, the more I relate it to parenting. Right? I have 3 kids under 7. Midshipmen don't understand, hopefully don't understand about being a parent, but when we can relate these things to different aspects of our life, the kind of light bulbs go off. Like, oh yeah, this maybe, you know, I get this. I get what this means as a team captain, but now you're relating it to me leading my physics group, or me leading my Sunday school group, or me leading my squad in the hall. As we can make these connections, I mean, that's where this workshop is really going to benefit the midshipmen in general, is when we can help them make those connections throughout their entire lives, military career in particular. It's where it's going to be the most beneficial.
This particular course, I think, is going to be especially important in this fall semester, because we have we used to have a lot of second class as squad leaders, and Tom, you can help me out. I don't know how many squad leaders are going to be second class this fall semester.
We are still doing that. I don't have the exact numbers.
Okay, but if we're still using second class, because we've done the shotgun, the challenges are significant, especially if you're trying to create this culture culture change that you're talking about. And again, this particular course, we have structured so that there are specific requirements that they have to do in the counseling, mentoring, leadership roles. And there's an instruction for the midshipmen. It's called the Aptitude for Commissioning Instruction. And in there's a directive that all youngsters are supposed to have a plebe that they mentor. All second class are supposed to have a youngster that they mentor. All first class are supposed to have a second class that they mentor. And when we poll the midshipmen, the only ones who are doing this on a regular basis are the ones in NL310, because they have to do it as part of the course. Okay. And actually, when in the NA203, I regularly ping on and say, hey, here's the instruction. Here's what it says. Who's doing this? And what we do is we give them the tools, we give them the practice, we make them accountable in that course. And hopefully one of the things that you will think about and more is this issue of accountability. Okay. They put together at the end of NL310, this is what I think my leadership model is, and this is what I am going to do over the next couple of weeks, next couple of months, next couple of years, in order to get to reaching that. And for someone who does remediation, I regularly say, let's bring up that report that you did as a second class midshipman. Let's take a look at this. What did you think you were going to do? What did you say you're going to do? How you doing? Okay. So, and again, we think this course really does pull things together, and the fact that we have so many second class who are squad leaders, we really think that's a very, very vital exercise for them to go through.
Remediation could be a sort of any sort of issue. It could be like a behavior issue or
conduct, respect, dignity, honor. Those items are all different remediation things, and of course, it's all 4 classes.
Right.
Yeah. Tom, I know you're pressed for time, but when you go through the behaviors, do you have any case studies or scenarios where it's a digital space? Or we're fundamentally different when we operate or behave in cyberspace, and I'm just wondering if you've crossed that threshold in 310.
No. So it's really just in the last 2 or 3 semesters that we've integrated the case studies that we're using here in Bancroft Hall. That's something that we have talked about and that we're going to do is branch out across the yard. So as we connect and as you complete this workshop, it'd be fantastic to talk, hey, what can we use in class? We do have a book that was just published in one of our PMPs, helped put it together, called Saltwater Leadership. And it's little vignettes written by naval officers, some grads, some not, that talk about a lot of the issues that come up in class. And we plan to use those throughout, integrated throughout the course. Obviously it's in one book, diversity or, other issues obviously that have come up. But if you have something that we can use in class, I would love to integrate it.
The immediate thing I thought of is that what we do talk about in class is this issue of anonymity. And how to do that, not do that, how to deal with that. Because, Thomas, as you know, the issue of yodel is just it's such an influence. And how do you respond to that as a leader? And that's, we've seen that play out big time over this past year here. And we bring that in the classroom.
And the last thing, when we talk about leader behaviors, I think, and this is just my take, talking to midshipmen, they have an idea of what leadership looks like. And a lot of it's from examples, things that they see. And what I tell students is the worst thing you can do is try to be a person that you see. And one of the things we try to do as we start the course talking about who we are as leaders and connecting back to the other courses is taking bits and pieces, the goods and the bads, to become your own person and kind of develop your own leadership style so that you really can be an authentic leader. And when I talked about servant authentic leadership, midshipmen will often try to label themselves as those things. Those labels should come from the people that you are leading, right? Like, yeah, that person's an authentic leader, that person's a servant leader. And the more that we can behave in a certain way that connects to who we are as a person, the more effective we are going to be at leading an organization. And I think the midshipmen see that, and not because of the course, but they're just the environment and the genre that they live in. They see that and they want that. So we're just trying to help them make those connections. Any other quick questions before I know I'm keeping you from a break?
And we're keeping you from some other obligations. So what, if you don't mind, we can take a break. You want to take 10 and then come on back and we'll finish NL 400? Good enough? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.